That time I got reincarnated as a demon lord, English by LordedoMal44. 54 Unexpected Savior. Tasuki felt her heart flutter along with the explosion that occurred, her heightened senses telling her that this explosion came from the same place Rimuru was resting. He's different from other monsters, hibernation somehow makes him fully recover, only he wouldn't normally wake up blowing things up.
And, considering the Dryad was there was no mistaking the source of the explosion. Ignoring Seal, who still didn't seem to care what happened, Tasuki put all her strength into her feet and charged forward, raising a cloud of dust as she went. If Rimuru really was vulnerable, the way he said he would be when hibernation mode started, then she and the others had to protect him. Fortunately, the AKA seemed to understand the concern she felt, moving right behind her to head in the direction of where Rimuru was. Boom, and then, another explosion occurred. As this time the two were closer to the explosion site, they could clearly see how flames were burning all over the floor Rimuru was on, and a part of the wall seemed to have been knocked down by the explosion. People who were close to the building, including those AKA asked to defend Rimuru in case of an enemy attack, ran away from the explosion site, with burns on their bodies or coughing from the smoke. Needless to say, how annoyed Tasuki and AKA had been seeing the soldiers who were supposed to be defending the place run away like that, but they decided to think more calmly about this matter later. After all, it's also true that Rimuru wouldn't want his subordinates to lose their lives in a battle they can't win like this. While thinking about it, Tasuki saw a jet of fire leave the floor where Rimuru was resting, but the energy of that magic wasn't Rimuru's. In fact, Tasuki didn't know who this fire magic belonged to. The only thing she knew was that this was spirit magic and it was powerful, a thing that only increased the possibility that it was Trainee attacking Rimuru. And, with Rimuru's multi-layer barrier turned off, he calmed down at once. I told you everything is going according to plan. Trainee heard those words, and at the same time, she stopped running. In front of her, Seal had appeared out of pure nothingness, stepping out from within a shadow next to her. AKA, who was running after her, also stopped running, having noticed the presence of Seal, who should have stayed behind, but not questioning it. Rimuru was never in danger. After all, there's still someone defending him. As soon as he heard that, Tasuki saw the wall where Rimuru was standing and two figures were revealed. She didn't personally recognize either of the two figures, but a smile formed on her face because, even though she couldn't recognize who they were, Tasuki was still able to know what they were. After all, they were both spirits. Trainee was ready to fire her magic, and suddenly, a spark. Get away from Rimuru-sama. A single spark that left Rimuru's body turned into a large ball of fire that flew towards him. Trainee backed away, aware that she wouldn't have come out of this with few injuries if she'd been hit by that attack. She might have recovered, but she still wasn't back to her 100% and, to make matters worse, she didn't have Sylphid to help her when things got bad. Of course, she was strong in her own right, but even she had to admit that her abilities as a Dryad weren't exactly geared towards combat, and that's why Sylphid had always been a great help. Help that, currently, she no longer had. As soon as Trainee gained some distance, wanting to avoid receiving a second attack, his gaze returned to Rimuru's body. He was still in hibernation, she had no doubt about that, but for some reason, spells were leaving Rimuru's body and attacking her. No, it wasn't just that. That was a spiritual magic attack. Spiritual fire magic. And those spells. Could this be the higher spirit of fire, Ifrit, that my sisters told me about? As if specifically to answer Trainee's question, sparks flashed once more around Rimuru's body, and this time, one of those sparks grew into a huge tornado of fire. The force behind that tornado of fire was clear. It was a higher spirit, and Trainee had no doubt that this was indeed a spirit with a good age. Just as he expected, Ifrit, a superior spirit of fire, materialized beside Rimuru. And judging by his hostile and protective stance, Trainee immediately understood who he was fighting and who he was protecting. Unfortunately for her, she wasn't on this flame spirit's good side. You, Ifrit. Why are you here, Rimuru? I heard that he defeated you, imprisoned you, and that he tried to absorb you. Why are you trying to defend a person like that? Trainee yelled at Ifrit, assuming a more combat-ready posture as she, at the same time, tried not to alert the higher spirit too much. The fireball that had passed through it had exploded on contact with the wall, causing the sound of the explosion to reverberate through the ogre's village.
No doubt reinforcement would come, and as strong as Trainee was, At least against the ogres, she wasn't sure how well she would fare against the current Tasuki, or else against that Majin seal she had never seen, one of the Majins, which Rimuru acquired while she was still in hibernation.
So if she wanted to do this right, Trainee had only two options. Convince Ifrit to join her and eliminate Rimuru before the others arrived, or somehow get past him and somehow kill Rimuru before he could. The others arrived. Still, it didn't seem like the first option was possible at the moment, and the second seemed extremely unlikely. Answer me. Why? Why would you team up with an enemy of our race? Trainee asked, clenching her fists angrily as she felt bile rise in her throat. Of course, she couldn't get sick, let alone vomit, although she could have eaten if she was materialized, but still, she felt sick to see how a higher spirit, one who had certainly heard the stories of past wars, if he would mate with an enemy of his own kind and disobey the Fairy Queen's express orders. Of course, Trainee felt this was a little hypocritical of her. She herself, for some reason, felt attraction to the slime she declared a race enemy of hers, something she had felt before without even knowing why, but now she approved of it. Because of this, Trainee knew it was wrong for her to judge Ifrit to be unable to resist this attraction. But she still did. After all, slimes were enemies of spirits, and that was the decision of the Queen of Spirits herself millennia ago. You're not going to answer me, are you? Ifrit did not respond. Just as she'd expected, he wasn't even willing to talk to her, just blindly following orders was what he would do. Brainwash? Trainee considered this, but she didn't think this was really the case, just seeing Ifrit's eyes. He was determined to protect Rimuru, even though he didn't know the exact reason for that action. Trainee felt a chill run down her spine as she thought about it, feeling that Ifrit's gaze had suddenly turned icy in her direction. The next moment Ifrit attacked Trainee, seemingly unwilling to engage in dialogue. Hump. So it's going to be like this. Well, thank you. That makes things easier. While dodging, Trainee shouted those words and also started attacking, trying to kill or at least incapacitate Ifrit. Dialogues would no longer be possible. Ifrit wasn't willing to help her and she didn't have time to waste. Soon this place would be swarming with enemies, and Trainee wouldn't have the slightest chance of killing Rimuru if that happened. Preparing a wind spell, her specialty, Trainee attacked the Ifrit with a blade of wind. Ifrit just created and expanded her fire aura, consuming the wind blades with the greatest ease in the world before countering with multiple fire attacks. Trainee was at a disadvantage. Wind spirit magic was powerful for creating slashing and blunt attacks, but this was primarily useful against non-spirit creatures. Against Ifrit, who was a spirit, creating damage would be extremely difficult when using only wind. Even worse, Ifrit's fire attribute is the natural enemy of Trainee's wind attribute, meaning she had little to no real chance of victory. This means that if she had any chance of winning, it was all down to her experience. Spirit creatures, the older they are, the more powerful they become. This is due to actual battle experience and spell control, which could be considered, for a non-spirit creature, to be a warrior's prowess in controlling and training his own body. Because of this, the oldest spirit was usually the one who won a fight, and while the difference between attributes could play a role, experience could allow for a turn of the tables. That's why, as the eldest, Trainee was still confident she could win. And yet, what is happening? The experience that was supposed to influence the battle was nowhere to be found. No, actually, Trainee's experience, which should be much older than Ifrit, seemed to be nothing when compared to Ifrit's experience, almost as if he was older than he actually was. As if he was hundreds, or even thousands, of years older than Trainee. As she thought about that, Trainee increased the level of the spells she was using, summoning hundreds of wind blades. All she wanted at that moment was for at least one of her blades to reach Rimuru and destroy him, but it didn't seem like would have the chance. To Trainee's attack, Ifrit just launched her own attack. Several small concentrated fireballs, each one precisely targeting a weak point of her wind blades. The wind blade, though strong from the front, was often quite weak from the side, and when the Ifrit's concentrated fireball hit them, the blades simply fell apart. Furthermore, some of Ifrit's attacks would even pass through where Trainee was, just missing her by sheer luck.
Ifrit was clearly holding the upper hand in this fight.
I can't let this happen. If Rimuru wakes up, I'll only get another chance like this when he goes back to hibernating like this. And I don't know when. Or if it will ever happen. I have to win here. As he thought so, Trainee attacked, using his knowledge of magic to try to find even just one weakness among Ifrit's attacks. He kept using only one of his attacks to face Trainee, showing that he was confident in his defense and just took the trouble to counterattack, but Trainee was still confident that he could beat him. There was a spell she had prepared after her defeat against Rimuru that, even though it used up a good portion of her spell reserves, could still be effective in this situation. A blast of concentrated air powerful enough to send this house, and the houses around it, flying, and with Rimuru unconscious and helpless, he would surely die from the attack. Still, she would have to attack both Ifrit and Rimuru now, and she would have to ensure that they were both defeated, or at least badly damaged, by this attack. In the end, to end everything quickly, that was the only option available to Trainee. Let's finish this here, Airy, Flame Circle. Before Trainee could finish preparing her magic, Ifrit, before her, muttered her words and pointed her hand at Trainee. She wanted to dodge and continue with her attack, but before she could do that, Trainee felt some kind of barrier pass around her, preventing her from moving outside the barrier. Looking back in terror, Trainee realized that on the wall behind her, a magic circle, the same magic circle Ifrit had used in her battle with Rimuru, had appeared. The magic circle had started to glow from the spots where the Ifrit's fire attacks it deflected had hit. The real purpose of those attacks was to create that circle and keep her inside the barrier. Turning to Ifrit again, Trainee saw how it was launching a fire attack in the form of a tornado that took the entire length of the barrier, and at the same time, she could feel that a similar tornado of flames was coming from behind, from the magic circle. She had been surrounded by two fire attacks more powerful than she could handle.
Tisk. Don't think this is the end. Knowing that she shouldn't be hit by these attacks and risk being killed, or worse yet, being absorbed by Rimuru, Trainee did the only logical thing to do. She took the attack she had prepared and fired it to the side, hitting the barrier that restricted her movements. Aerial Destroyer. The air finished gathering in Trainee's hands, forming a sphere of air so dense a person could touch it, before releasing the sphere against the barrier. The air sphere collided with the barrier and collapsed, releasing all the pressure, and a huge explosion formed, breaking the layers of the barrier in just a second, and soon after it continued to destroy the walls of the house they were in and the other things. On your way.
Trainee, of course, took advantage of the fact that the barrier had been broken and left the trap that Ifrit had created, avoiding being hit by the flames for just a little while. Still, that didn't change the fact that she had expended a great deal of her magic just to get away with it. There was no way she could go on with the battle. I'm coming back and I'm going to win. Don't think we're done here. Trainee just muttered this before disappearing, aware that Tasuki, aka, and several of the ogre squads were closing in on the house, and all were prepared to fight the village's attacker. Also, Trainee watched as Seal disappeared in one place and appeared in another, and she realized one thing. Seal could have gotten to her any time she wanted, and she just didn't. Seal didn't want to defend Rimuru. This gave Trainee an idea, and she was sure to confirm her idea later on. But for now, Trainee would back off. With that in mind, Trainee teleported away, ending the assassination attempt. Tasuki calmly entered the room Rimuru had used to rest, and almost at the same time the flames in the room began to die out. Of course, she wasn't the one who erased them. The one who was responsible for this was actually the same person who set the room on fire who did it, Ifrit himself. That's why, as soon as she entered, the first thing Tasuki did was stare at Ifrit, with her purest murderous intent leaking out of every one of her pores, making the higher spirit tremble in fear. And then, right behind Tasuki, aka, the leader of the ogres, entered the room followed by Seal. The other ogres remained outside the room, on guard in case there was another attack or the enemy returned. They were determined to do their duty this time, even if it cost their lives. Of course, for Tasuki this was pointless. The enemy would hardly return, and if their determination couldn't have saved Rimuru, then their determination is empty. I have to remember to teach them a lesson or two. With that train of thought, Tasuki turned his attention once more to the superior spirit in front of him, freeing him from his murderous intent. She recognized Ifrit, the higher spirit of fire that Rimuru fought to free Shizu, from when Rimuru brought the matter up with her. Still, although that Ifrit was an enemy, the Ifrit before her had saved Rimuru's life and he had fought one of her fellow spirits. He deserved, at the very least, a chance to explain himself, as well as a thank you. So, what are you doing here, Ifrit? And why did you protect Rimuru? Speak the truth or I will. Tasuki didn't complete his words, but the pressure of his aura increased a little, The power she had acquired after being nominated by Rimuru, her unique skill, Magic Reactor, was evolved and became Great Mage. With the current increase in spells she had, even the current Ifrit before her felt cornered before her. Fortunately, he didn't have to answer. Ifrit suffered damage to his core while in Rimuru's stomach. His memories were corrupted, and as such, he doesn't remember most of what happened earlier, around the time he was in Shizu-san. Precisely, Seal-sama. Seal, who was at the back, spoke those words as she walked over until she was beside Ifrit. Ifrit, upon seeing her approach, immediately knelt before her as he answered her, a sincere expression on her face. Seeing this, Tasuki could only back away, fading his killing intent and looking at Seal. She knew that Seal was one of Rimuru's skills, probably the only person in Tempest who knew about it, so she was certain that Seal wouldn't lie or do anything bad to Rimuru. And, while the same might not be true for her, Tasuki still knew that Seal wouldn't allow Ifrit near Rimuru if he was a threat. Despite this, it still created some questions within Tasuki, questions she would be sure to elicit some answers from Rimuru later on. Well, for now, I'll accept that. Still, whether Ifrit, with or without memory, is going to be free, that's Rimuru's choice. I hope you understand that. Ifrit nodded, showing that he understood this, and Seal just smiled. Tasuki had to remind herself that her emotions were just a simulation to avoid getting irritated with Seal, but she reverted to her previous train of thought. For now, please stay with Rimuru. I'll leave his safety in your hands. Saying that, Tasuki turned around and started walking towards the exit, with AKA moving behind her to follow. Seal also started to follow the two, leaving Ifrit and Rimuru alone in the room. Seeing that he was no longer needed, Ifrit went back inside Rimuru's body to regain her magic. Wow. That was pretty impressive. I didn't realize that Ifrit had been corrupted and that you had controlled it as a subordinate. Less than Ifrit apparently got corrupted during Shizu-san's resurrection. However, such corruption was only noticed recently, with the revision of skills after the Battle of the Village of Ogres. Greater than. I see. That makes sense. I didn't pay much attention to the things I ate until recently, so I guess I didn't stop to care about Ifrit. Sylphid is something else. She can be a bargaining chip against trainee in an emergency, but I hadn't thought about Ifrit. At the very least, since he saved my life, I guess I should reward him. Should I try to name it? Less than negative. You still don't have the power to do that. If you try, you'll run out of spells before you can get it, go into hibernation, and risk the safety of the Ifrit higher spirit. Greater than. I see. It makes sense. Therefore, I will be careful. But, now that you bring it up, Seal, can I ask you a question? Less than positive. I will answer any question you have, Rimuru. Greater than if I'm in hibernation, and because of that I can't move, then. How can your clone move normally like that? Why aren't you in hibernation like me? You even used skills. And then, wouldn't you answer me anything? Why am I in hibernation if you still have spells? Less than good point. Returning to low activity mode. Entering hibernation. Z's. Greater than you buy.